As Jubilee planning progressed, Her Majesty was distracted by more worrying matters. Her relationship with the heir to the throne was at a low ebb. They rarely spoke. The invitation to Charles's 50th birthday party at Highgrove, 2 years after Camilla's, came not from him, but via his friend and neighbor, the Earl of Shelburne. When the Queen learned that Camilla would be present, she declined, as did his 3 siblings. Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you are new, then welcome. I hope to earn your subscription today. We are going through Tina Brown's book, The Palace Papers. The subtitle is Inside the House of Windsor, The Truth and the Turmoil, which we all know there have been a lot of stories of turmoil with those faces and with these faces. And so these are the stories we are focused on in this book. We have made it through the section that is exclusively focused on Camilla. She'll come into the story as we progress through. But now we are to the part, we're to chapter 4, that's going to be focused on Queen Elizabeth. And just so we're all clear on what's happening in this book, the entire book, I would say it is like the story that happens between the death of 2 major royal figures. The first is we are talking about the period that's after the death of Princess Diana. She died in 1997, and this book is all about the monarchy struggling through the reality of her death. Up until the point, for the 25 years up until the point that Queen Elizabeth passes away. This book was actually published 5 months before she passed. And so that's the way I'm thinking about it. It wasn't the way that she designed it because, of course, she did not foresee when she submitted this to the publisher probably 12 months before it was actually published that Queen Elizabeth would pass at that point. But for our purposes, that's a helpful way to think about it, is what happened in the monarchy between these 2 women who impacted it and what happened in the middle part. So we have made it through the backstory of Camilla and Charles, which is helpful because now moving forward, we are going to have that as a foundational aspect of how we understand the things that proceed from here. Now we are to Queen Elizabeth. And of course, to understand her, we're going to get some history today. So without further ado, let's dig right in. The Mother of the Nation, Chapter 4. The subtitle for this is The Queen's 21st Century Headaches. The dawning of the 3rd millennium was an anxious time for Queen Elizabeth II. Normally, she would have been in Norfolk, surrounded by friends and family for her annual New Year's Eve celebration at Sandringham. Instead, on the night of 31st December 1999, she had gone to bed at Windsor Castle, distinctly disgruntled. She and Prince Philip had been obliged to join Prime Minister Tony Blair and his wife, Sherry, at the disastrous New Year's celebration for the grand opening of the Millennium Dome. So she has to be at this special event that she didn't really want to be at, and we're going to get a description of it. The enormous white fiberglass structure built on 48 acres of derelict land in Greenwich was conceived both to revive an abandoned part of London and to house a sort of Festival of Britain type exhibit. It was supposed to ignite a spirit of national optimism. Even though it had been started by Blair's predecessor, John Major, the dome, designed by a celebrated architect, had become a signature project of Prime Minister Blair. It was unwisely touted as a triumph of confidence over cynicism, boldness over blandness, excellence over mediocrity. And therefore it became a much relished object of derision for the British press and public. When Robert Fellows attended a windy meeting with civil servants, Downing Street advisors, and other establishment bigwigs about the dangers of Y2K, which for those of you who are younger viewers, just let me assure you that Y2K was an awfully promoted terror that we were all supposed to carry with us, that all the computers were going to crash when the 99 of 1999 gave way to 00 of 2000, that something was going to cause basically potential for global computer shutdowns around the world. Nothing happened. We all bought a bunch of water bottles. Well, when they were having a meeting about the dangers of Y2K, he was asked what the Queen's plans were for New Year's Eve. "Well, I think she'll probably want to go to church," the Hale Fellows said. The whole table was reduced to silence as everyone realized that the new millennium also signified 2,000 years since the incarnation of Christ. Yes, that would be more meaningful to Queen Elizabeth than Y2K or some Millennium Dome. The dome's grand opening was one of the most monumental cock-ups in public relations history. So there was a bomb scare. That was the first problem, and the whole event was nearly called off. But then media leaders and VIPs were supposed to be ferried in, but a bottleneck of ticketing at the station meant that the top executives of England were stranded in bitter cold for hours, trying to get to it. Mortifyingly, London's celebration was clearly upstaged by Paris, which chose to present the simple beauty of the Eiffel Tower, illuminated by 20,000 strobe lights and a firework display that could have taught Blair's team a thing or two. Yeah, simplicity often wins in these things. Simplicity, regalness, big, beautiful ideas that stand the test of time rather than some novel, exciting thing of boldness over blandness. Sometimes things of long-standing tradition and long-held beauty hold firm over something that's bold and brand new, but comes off like a duct-taped banana to a wall, which, if you don't know, is a modern art installation that I believe just sold for several $1,000,000. Anyway, so just picture this. The Queen and Prince Philip arrived by boat at Greenwich after an already exhausting evening. They had gone to do one event and they were showing up here by boat to do another. Now, I just want to say, my mom is still in her 60s, but I don't think she's made it to midnight since she was in her 50s. I mean, she just goes right on to bed. She's like, y'all have fun. She has no desire to stay up till midnight. And so I think it's just remarkable that they're even still awake at their age. I think they would have been in their 70s at this point. And I just want to say props to them for even making it to an event in the evening on New Year's Eve after having anything else during the day. Well, every member of the royal family had been deployed that evening to fan out and cover various options. So there were different things that they all needed to do. Prince Charles was dispatched to Scotland. Prince Andrew had nautical assignments. Princess Anne was deployed at an event for homeless people in Westminster. Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex, since his marriage to PR executive Sophie Rhys-Jones, landed the plum gig of touring Surrey Police Headquarters. It was already past their usual bedtime when the Queen and Prince Philip, accompanied by Princess Anne and her second husband, Commodore Timothy Lawrence, disembarked at the Queen Elizabeth II pier. Inside the dome, they were greeted with rows and rows of empty seats. Alistair Campbell noted in his diary that the royal party were clearly pissed off to be there. Tony Blair worked away at them, but Anne was like granite. Cherry, Blair's wife, even curtsied to the Queen, a bit of a first, I think, but it didn't seem to do much good. The Queen did kiss Philip and took his hands during the song, Auld Lang Syne, but they did not look comfortable with the whole thing. Tony Blair claimed Philip said to him that it was brilliant, but his body language did not radiate in that direction. So the royal family is angry to even have to be at this thing rather than their normal gig up at Sandringham. The royal couple were not fans of Blair at the best of times, though after 9 prime ministerial August weekends at Balmoral, the Queen somewhat warmed to him, his wife claims. In the period after Diana's death, the Queen found her 44-year-old Prime Minister's much publicized efforts to mediate her response to popular feeling overly inflated. Robert Lacey reports that in 2001, the Downing Street briefing room heard how the Prime Minister had been talking to the Queen in their weekly audience about the Golden Jubilee. To receive some gentle correction, my golden jubilee, the Queen said. Yes, there are very few things that she just got to have as her own. Very often her service is directed towards other entities. She's there opening Parliament. She's there for advice and consent of certain things. Mostly it's ceremonial and it is for other people's purposes. But the Golden Jubilee was specifically her own event. It was not an event, it was her event. And so she was very excited about it. Blair had got royal relations off to a chilly start with his government's 1997 decision not to replace the 43-year-old royal yacht Britannia. The ship itself had been a special thing to Queen Elizabeth. We're told in December 1997, at the ship's decommissioning ceremony, the Queen shed a rare tear. Britannia represented not only memories of grand and glamorous state visits for her, but also some of her happiest times with the family. She and Philip had been closely involved in its conception from scratch, the sole home they had actually designed to suit themselves. It was the only way she could holiday privately. Every summer, the first leg of their annual journey to Balmoral began with a cruise around the coast of the Western Isles to Aberdeen, anchoring at Caithness, I didn't look this one up, Caithness perhaps, to call in on the Queen Mother at the Castle of May for a picnic. So there was always this between them, that he had been the one, not that he had done it personally, but that his government had run on the idea of cutting government waste, I believe, and just trimming down some of the excess in order to make way for prosperity, I would assume. But also to do away with some things that were just tradition, that we weren't going to do things just for the sake of tradition. And another example of that would be this. Another irritation from New Labour was the termination of all but 92 of the hereditary peers from the House of Lords in 1999. 658 of the aristocratic old guard were swept out, ending 8 centuries of parliamentary history on the spot. So I actually went into a little bit of a rabbit hole this last week, just looking up this and trying to understand it a little better. In the U.S., of course, we have the Senate and we have the House. And the main difference between those is the length of time they serve and apportionment. That Senate, we only get 2 per state, and then the House is according to population. But of course, in England, there was the House of Lords, which was according to peerage, according to titling that happened based on birth and rank. It was not something that you could, by way of excellence or merit, work your way into. It's not something that, by way of democracy or elections, someone could influence. And so as I looked it up, this is what I learned. For those of you who are also not British, there were 5 ranks, is my understanding, that were included in the House of Lords: Duke, Marquess, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. And so these were ranks of peerage. They would come in ermine-trimmed robes. And the idea, as I listened to a couple of interviews about this, the idea of what they did bring to the table was a sense of history, a sense of why certain decisions had been made long ago, a sense of tradition and responsibility and caretaking of particular plots of land or particular interests, that there would be a sense of heritage and world history built into the House of Lords. I think those were the best arguments that I heard for why it perhaps was a good thing for Britain. Don't mistake that as me arguing for it. Just to try to see from their perspective, that's what, if for those who were in this position, that's why they thought it was sad for it to come to an end, was that this would be the loss of, one man, for example, took the reporter into his, great-great-grandfather's room that had old battle armor and historical elements that had influenced that section of England for centuries. And so his argument for why it was a travesty for this to be taken away from their family was that there was a sense of history and a tie to the land that was significant, a cultural memory that was preserved in these families, that they maintained diaries and journals and documents that gave credence to why certain decisions had been made and that sort of thing, which I think could be entirely valid. Nonetheless, that was the argument for the House of Lords. And I just found that kind of interesting of what would be the benefit of the House of Lords. But when I heard that, I thought, okay, I can see why someone might argue that there was indeed some value in that system. Nevertheless, Tony Blair and his Labor Party brought in not only the getting away of things like the Britannia, of the taxpayer dollars, keeping up some of these old things that seemed like luxury items for the Queen, but also things like this, the ranks of peerage, that positions of power would be granted to someone based on their family or their rank rather than merit or the will of the people. And so apparently all but 92 were done away with. So apparently there were, at least at this time, kept 92. I did not look up if that has since been changed. So if you have input about that, you can leave it in the comments. But I found that whole debate somewhat fascinating. Just as a former political science student, I find that interesting. And, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me, there was a thing that came up with a quote from an old Sumerian leader. And as I read it, I thought that's a wonderful goal of government. It said, like, his goal was to create safe streets so that no dark corner would be an unsafe place for any citizen, essentially. And you guys know, if you don't, I am a Christian, and the Bible says that God instituted government for the good of people. And so as I thought about that Sumerian, person, whoever, 3,000, no, more like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, coming up with that goal, that is the proper goal of government, that there would be people ensuring the good of those under their care. And so, whether it's the House of Lords or the Senate and the House or some other system, the overarching goal of government ought to be to care for and produce justice and good in the lives of those who are governed by it. During her lifetime, the Queen, she always was only a titular head, meaning she did not pull the levers of government. She was more the ceremonial head of the government throughout her time as Queen. But it's interesting to think about these changes in government that happened under her rule. Well, back to the Millennium Dome. The Millennium Dome represented everything the Queen most disliked: hype, expense, and patriotic emotion. It increased her unease about how to strike the right tone in her impending Golden Jubilee in 2002. For the first time in her reign, she was feeling unsure. The aftermath of Princess Diana's death, when she had so clearly misjudged the popular mood, damaged her normally implacable confidence. She remained bruised, too, from the annus horribilis, as she had called it, of 1992, when the marriages of 3 of her 4 children collapsed, her beloved childhood home Windsor Castle went up in flames, and the British public was noisily resentful about funding the repairs for Windsor Castle. This is part of her speech that was really lovely, actually. She said, "No institution, city, monarchy, whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support." This was such a humble speech, for somebody who had already been Queen for, 40 years at that point, 1992, almost 40 years, for her to have given 40 years of her life. I'm now 45. To imagine the entire length of my memory to have been devoted to the service of one nation, and then to be coming to that nation in hope that they would assist with the repairs needed and offer some sympathy during a difficult year would be a difficult thing indeed, and her humility is admirable, I think. Tina Brown notes, her placatory tone helped revive the nation's esteem, as did the monarchy's volunteering to start paying income tax for the first time, and its funding of Windsor's repairs by opening Buckingham Palace to the public. Oh, I didn't know that Buckingham Palace tours, I guess, were to help fund the repairs of Windsor. Interesting. To compound her uncertainties, all the scandals of the 1990s gave added fuel to a Republican movement in Australia. Now, for my American listeners, I want to point out that Republican in this sense does not mean Democrat and Republican the way that we understand it. Republican in this sense means a republic, which is a forming of government in contrast to a monarchical government. It would be the idea of casting off the monarchy altogether. So when you hear the word Republican in this book, you guys who are British citizens can correct me if I'm saying something in error here, but my understanding is that a Republican sentiment means overthrowing the monarchy altogether. By 1999, a growing number of Australians found this whole concept a grating anachronism, particularly when they considered that any day soon they could find themselves bowing to His Majesty King Charles III. All Australian polls indicated that the monarchy would lose the referendum, and the Queen was preparing to be philosophical about being given the heave-ho. She actually expressed that she would prefer for this to happen during her reign than her son's. She was concerned that a new Australian republic could provoke a domino effect, that Canada and others in the Commonwealth might follow suit, and that would actually be humiliating at the start of Charles's reign, which she knew at this point could come any time. She was already in her 70s. To everyone's surprise, however, Australians voted no to a republic, 55 to 45%. In March 2000, the Queen visited Australia to show that there were no hard feelings. Her speech at the Sydney Opera House struck the right tone of humility. She said, "The future of the monarchy in Australia is an issue for you, the Australian people, and you alone, to decide by democratic and constitutional means." 15 years later, when a Republican, Turnbull, took office, it's a tribute to her diplomatic skills that he swore off republicanism for as long as she was the monarch. It's interesting too for us, and especially those of you, I know there are some who listen to this channel that are from Australia. And if you would go further than what I'm able to in the comments, I would be grateful for you to do that. But my understanding is that this was actually re-raised a little bit in the last year, and that it was tamped down during 2024. I don't know if it made it to ballot or not. I can't remember, but I know it was a big issue of discussion for a bit. And then Charles and Camilla actually went and visited, and they got a very warm reception. It seemed that the Australian people turned out in droves to see King Charles. And so, right now, I don't know, I don't want to say too much, but it does seem that, King Charles, we know he has cancer. We've not been told the kind, but we know he's actively fighting and has been for now 10, 11, almost 12 months. And so, we don't know, but we also have not been told that he's like cancer-free or in remission or that things look good. The things that they have said have been like, he's responding well to treatment. He got approval to go on this trip to Australia. Now, it wasn't as long as he wished to go. I think he had asked for a longer amount of time, and his doctors basically said, you really shouldn't be taking time off treatment at all. But if anything, we would limit it to whatever length of time he was given. I want to say it was something like he asked for 2.5 weeks and they gave him 6 days or something like that. So he had time in Australia, but it wasn't as much time as he wished for. And he wasn't able to go, I believe, to New Zealand and other places that he would have liked to go. But he wanted to go back to Australia because it's been a significant place in his life and he's had many memorable trips there. And so to me, it's interesting to read this about the concerns that existed 25 years ago and now have still been raised again with King Charles, the very issue we're talking about here. And yet it has still been kicked down the road, that the Republicans have not won the day in the sense of the monarchy. Now, they may have in other policy terms, but that they have not, at present, kicked the monarchy to the side. A more rising concern at the palace was the monarchy's lackluster image in its own country. The Queen feared her looming golden jubilee, like the dome, would be a resounding flop. A planning committee was set up under the direction of Robert Janvrin, who had succeeded Robert Fellows as the Queen's private secretary. The palace has many flaws, but one thing it's very good at is planning. Energized by Janvrin, all of the Queen's advisors embraced the idea of the Jubilee having an atmosphere of a huge national party rather than some solemn and upright celebration. Instead of it being somber, showy, instead, let's make it a huge national party where we're all celebrating this big event. The month of June was chosen, and there was an enthusiastic lobby for Her Majesty to take a ride on the new London Eye, which Tony Blair had opened for the Millennium Celebration. Her response to this suggestion was, "I am not a tourist." Which I just love. I've already said it. I love Queen Elizabeth. I love that she was exemplar in so many ways in her just dignity. But I love this too. I love that she was willing to occasionally just say, "I'm not doing that." Like, she bent when it was the dome situation. She's like, "Fine, I'll do a different New Year's Eve celebration." But when it's this, she's like, "I'm not going to go act like I'm a tourist in London. That's absurd." This is beautiful. It's such a great response. The suggestion of a major pop concert at Buckingham Palace Garden, dubbed Party at the Palace, went over somewhat better. Somebody asked with apprehension if she would be willing to sign off on the inclusion of Ozzy Osbourne, the rocker who was formerly the lead singer of the heavy metal band Black Sabbath. And her response was, "Oh, that's all right, as long as he doesn't bite the head off of a bat." Which took them completely by surprise. It says the Jubilee team were surprised at Her Majesty's familiarity with this nugget of pop culture history. For those who don't know, Osbourne had performed this stunt at a concert in Des Moines in 1982. So this is planning for 2002. So she is reaching back 20 years about what could be an obscure pop star. You know, this like death metal, heavy metal band singer, Ozzy Osbourne. He had performed a stunt. He thought, get this, he thought the bat that had been thrown on stage was a rubber bat. So he just like, in a fit of, I guess, stage acting, bit the head off of it and then realized it wasn't made of rubber. It says, when he realized that, he was rushed to the hospital for a rabies shot, which is hilarious. I don't know. I would have loved to have been there that night just to see that transition of this heavy metal rock concert to people rushing up and being like, "Wait a second, was that real? We got to get you to the hospital. We got to get a shot. I wonder what happened to the concert." My logical brain is like, what happened to that evening? Did they go on with the show? What happened? Anyway, they were all surprised that she even knew that. There was a portrait with a painter called Lucien Freud that was to be unveiled shortly before the Jubilee. And I'm going to go ahead and put this one up on display for you guys so that you can make your own decision. From May 2000 to December 2001, the Queen sat for 15 sessions. They reportedly had a whale of a time and talked about horses and racing nonstop. The resulting portrait was as unforgiving as one might expect from him. Coarse-featured, grim, and imposing. Is that how you would describe it? Let me know. You guys are seeing it right now. It's an interesting piece of art and not at all what you might expect of a lovely, long-serving queen of her nation, to me. Interestingly, though, even though one critic argued that the Queen should have had him locked up for such an ugly image, and unlike Winston Churchill, who descended into a thunderous mood in 1954 when he saw an unflattering 80th birthday portrait, The Queen displayed her usual absence of personal vanity when she saw the portrait unveiled. Her response was, "Very interesting." Perhaps it helped that it was small. It was only about 6 by 9 inches, maybe as big as this. So it's a small portrait. So perhaps that helped her response. But I do think it's insightful that she was not overcome with wrath, fury, a self-focus at all. That she just was able to say, very interesting, and not take it personally. I think she had a unique mixture of regalness in the sense of she really wanted the crown to be held in high regard. She wanted the position to be held with honor. And yet I don't think she had an ego that made her care that much about things like this. What do you think? As Jubilee planning progressed, Her Majesty was distracted by more worrying matters. Her relationship with the heir to the throne was at a low ebb. They rarely spoke. The invitation to Charles's 50th birthday party at Highgrove, 2 years after Camilla's, came not from him, but via his friend and neighbor, the Earl of Shelburne. When the Queen learned that Camilla would be present, she declined, as did his 3 siblings. So this is interesting, you guys, because one thing that happens, I think it's interesting, one thing that can happen in families where there's a disagreement about perhaps the spouse that the person has chosen, or there's some sort of disagreement, is that often there's sides that are taken, and some people say, well, we're going to go ahead and have them come over, and other people steer clear. And this is such a clear act of none of us are going to have anything to do with her, even though, Anne had dated Andrew Parker Bowles. They had all been friends back in the 70s. They had all known each other and socialized for decades. But for them to draw this clear line in the sand is very interesting. And to still be doing so 4 or 5 years after Diana has passed is significant. It's interesting. It's a socially interesting aspect of their royal decision making. In recent years, neither she nor the Queen Mother had relented regarding ever being in the same room as Mrs. Parker Bowles. At the formal 50th birthday party hosted for Charles at Buckingham Palace, Camilla did not make the list. So there was a clear line in the sand here as regards Camilla. It was nonetheless clear that Mark Bolland was slowly but surely managing Camilla's reemergence. He's easing her into the Prince of Wales's weekend parties at Sandringham. And he tells us about an accidental meeting, is what it's called, between Camilla and William that took place. And William was furious that it was leaked, that it had happened. It was just before his 16th birthday in June 1998. So this is rewinding a few years. Camilla had been overnighting at St. James's Palace when William returned for a visit from school. The Prince of Wales went ahead and took the plunge and escorted Camilla up for a 30-minute meeting with his son over drinks. The first of a couple of cautious lunches and teas. The temperature of William's resistance was said to be reduced by those who knew about these meetings. It would take longer, however, to break the ice with Prince Harry. A member of the household told Tina Brown, that when the younger boy was eventually prevailed upon to be in the presence of Mrs. Parker Bowles, he unnerved her with long silences and smoldering, resentful stares. Can you imagine that? It's this woman that has wronged your mother in your eyes and wronged your father and thus wronged you and messed up your whole life. Can you just imagine the hatred that he would have had for her? And to me, he still has that. He has never gotten over that. In my eyes, he has learned to sometimes coexist with her, although right now he doesn't have to. But when he goes to public events, he'll be, I guess, I don't even want to say amenable, but he'll coexist peaceably, sort of. But I can totally picture this unnerving her with long silences and smoldering resentful stares. And frankly, I can't blame him. He's a teenage boy responding precisely how you would expect a teenage boy to respond in this circumstance. That seems very, very normal to me. Different than his big brother, who was a people pleaser and knew that he had duty on the line and that there was a monarchy, and he knew he had to respect his father to some degree. So it's just interesting to see those differences between the two young men. With the Queen still intractable on the Camilla question, Charles agreed with Bolland that his best recourse was to turn up the gas with the media. So they decided to use the occasion of Camilla's sister, Annabelle's 50th birthday party at the Ritz. The press would be tipped off by St. James's Palace to capture the Prince and Mrs. Parker Bowles openly leaving the event together shortly after midnight. As the couple emerged from the party, more than 200 photographers blinded them with flash bulbs. No secret about their relationship now, none possible at all, a BBC News reader intoned. This was the photograph that people have waited so long for, the picture people have waited so long to see. There followed a rush of other couple sightings, theater visits, an engagement in Scotland to thank charity supporters, and a fundraising dinner where Camilla wore the potent signifier of their intimacy, a brooch with the Prince of Wales' feathers. So at this point, this event was January 28th, 1999, and they had met in the summer of 1971. So this is the first emergence, we could say the first potentially honorable out show of 28 years of a hidden relationship. For 28 years, they've been sneaking around in parking lots and private estates and the privacy of long driveways and parties that were snuck off to and whatever, little trysts here and there. But for the first time, you know, we had that previous one where she showed up to the event and her photo was taken, but this is the first official photo of the two of them publicly together. January 1999. So that would be a year and a half after Diana died. But 28 years of hidden relationship, which I just think is an interesting thing to contemplate. There's not one among us that would say, oh, that's a great way for a relationship to get kicked off. That's the model relationship. I wish my relationship started like that. No, they wouldn't. But just like we talked about in the last episode, at some point we have to consider what is. And we can all sit in the realm of what ought to have been, what shouldn't have been, what could have been. And those questions are valid. But at the end of the day, we have to reside where reality is. And reality is that for 28 years, they had loved each other. They hadn't shown it very well, to be frank with you. I don't think that is, at least in the form that it was back in the beginning, that is not what I would call love. Love, by its purest definition, is seeking the long-term good of the other. And if either one of them had done that, let's just take a case study. If Prince Charles had truly shown love to Camilla, then the moment she took her vows, he would have said, for your good, I'm never going to see you in any other capacity other than a public, fully honorable situation where we happen to be at the same social engagement. And, you've been special to me in the past and I wish you well. And I am all the way in on hoping and praying for the success of your marriage. And therefore, I'm never going to engage you in any other manner other than an enjoyable, pleasant, lighthearted, social kind of way. That would be the honorable way, and vice versa, right? That either one of them in seeking, and so if we had that, then we never would have gotten to the pitiful situation of Diana. We never would have gotten to her being thrown over, or her being publicly humiliated, or her sons having broken hearts, right? We never would have gotten to that if love had been exercised way back here when she was married to a different man. That was really the proper course of action from the beginning. But that isn't what was. And so here we are in 1999. Everything has happened. Princess Di has unfortunately had a car accident. The boys are motherless. And he still loves this woman. And now she's divorced and she's available and he's available. So this is what is. And I think for all of us at some point, I've been there several times now. We are dealing with human beings. We aren't dealing with little robots that do everything perfectly. Our friends don't operate that way. Our relatives don't operate that way. And our royal figures don't operate that way, right? So we, on some level, yes, we pray for the best. We, in our own lives, seek to do what is honorable and right and honorable in the sight of all. But at the same time, other people don't always behave according to the ways that we want to. And so then our response, we could go around cutting everyone off who doesn't agree with how we think they ought to live, or we can, interact with what is. You guys, let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Did you enjoy the Queen's responses to things like the London Eye? That cracked me up that she said, I am not a tourist. Such a great perspective that, hey, the London Eye is great. It's for people who don't know about this city. I'm literally the queen, not only of this city, but this entire land and over the Commonwealth. So I'm not going to be going on a little tour in the London Eye. Thank you very much. She just makes me laugh. I love the Queen so much. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you leave lots of wonderful comments. I look forward to reading all about things. We had a lot of parliamentary things, House of Lords, Commonwealth questions, Australian Republican questions. Lots of things came up this time that I would love your input about. So leave those in the comments for us. Have a great day. We'll hope to see you soon. Bye.